You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
We're standing in front of the tomb of John Maurice de Nassau-Siegen. We're in the village of Houw, on the border of Kleve, and just a few kilometers away from the border with the Netherlands. John Maurice de Nassau's life story is not quite one from rags to riches, but it's certainly one from an origin of relative obscurity to a grand finale of hobnobbing with Europe's kings and queens. Maurice was born the 13th child out of a total of 25 to John VII, Count of Nassau-Siegen, but also the first of John with his second wife, Margaret of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg. Though he and his father were of a reasonably prominent family and were acquainted with several royal houses in Europe, his father's support for the Dutch independence war against Spain had drained the family's funds, which meant that there was little money to go around for Maurice when he was about to come of age. Maurice's grandfather was the brother of William the Silent, like Maurice himself, born in Dillenburg, a fortress in Germany, and who was the one who led Holland to independence. William first, and then his sons and grandsons were politicians, first amongst equals, until eventually the Dutch royal family rose from their ranks. They were influential and wealthy. But although Maurice was connected by blood to this Dutch branch of Nassau's, his having been born in Germany while also having few financial resources to his name meant that, though he was in a position to tap into his connections, he still needed to also show he was also worthy, capable of a prominent military or political position. At 16, Maurice joined the Dutch army and quickly rose through the ranks, deftly showing his worth while also benefiting from his connections. Then, in 1636, at only 32, the Dutch West India Company, which had created the position of Governor-General, perhaps specifically to appeal to Maurice, recruited Nassau, who had taken on the position of Count of Nassau-Siegen from his father in 1623, to lead the Dutch colony in Brazil, where the Dutch had managed to seize control from parts of the continent from Portugal in 1630. The position of Governor-General of Dutch Brazil had in its role strong parallels with the Dutch position of stadtholder, the role several of his cousins were filling in Holland, controlling the provinces, and in Holland a position that, because of his German descent, was unavailable to him. Yet, as Governor-General of Brazil, not technically as a politician, but as an employee of the Dutch West India Company, he could be seen as on political par with his Dutch cousins. In this context, it can't be a coincidence that Maurice built his most famous residence in The Hague, right next to the Dutch Parliament building. The Mauritshuis, built with the money Maurice made in the colony, indeed, through exploitation of land and people, was nicknamed the Sugar Palace, both for its looks and for the source of the funds. Now a museum housing The Girl with the Pearl Earring and View on Delft, both by Vermeer, Maurice could finally consider himself as having arrived. However, he was still only a count, something he worked on after his return to Europe in 1644. He had a prominent Dutch historian write a book about him, praising his work in Brazil, and handed it to people of prominence while gifting many of the things he had brought from Brazil to some of the kings and queens of Europe. And this resulted in 1652 in him being granted the title of Prince of Nassau-Siegen. Already in 1647, Maurice had become stadtholder of Kleve, close to the Dutch border and close to where we are now. Peter Post, the architect Maurice had brought with him to Brazil and who had designed the Mauritshuis in The Hague, had renovated the Zwanenburg castle in Kleve. But it was Peter's son, Maurits, probably named after Maurice, who designed Maurice's personal residence, the Prinsenhof or Prince's Court. But Maurice eventually didn't spend much time here, as he served as Dutch field marshal in the Franco-Dutch War, but did spend his final few years in a nearby country house. Maurice, now a prince himself, had become the personal advisor to some of the most important politicians and royals of Germany and Holland, while leading the Dutch army in battle. He had become an essential link between those of royal stature from both countries his life represented, Holland and Germany. The Prinsenhof was badly damaged during the Second World War and wasn't rebuilt, but the gorgeous gardens remain and can be visited today. In northern Brazil, many still think back fondly to Maurice, considering him a kind of enlightened colonizer, and it can't be denied that the man had a soft spot for science, arts and culture, famously bringing with him a retinue of artists, architects and at least one astronomer and a brewer of beer. Around his prominent offices in Recife, from where Maurice governed the colony, he had extensive gardens constructed, and it's hard to not see a parallel with the gardens here in Kleve. The famous Nassauer Allee still exists here in Kleve, for which Nassau ordered 600 lime trees to be planted in a straight line along the lane. The effect is rather stunning. In fact, this so impressed the Elector of Brandenburg, with whom Nassau had a close connection, that he copied the concept, creating what became Unter den Linden in Berlin, while the Berlin Zoo was also designed based on Maurice's garden in Kleve. And Maurice had a tomb built here, where he was interred upon his death, even though after a year, on the Count's own request, his body was moved to his own Principality of Siegen, where Maurits Post had designed a burial vault, aptly called the Fürstengruft or Princely Crypt, and in which a total of 31 of his family members ended up being interred. Dillenburg, where Nassau was born, to Kleve, where he died, today is a mere 2-hour drive, but for Maurice it was a journey that brought him south of the equator, mixing heritage, contacts, cunning and capabilities, to see himself grow from the penniless 13th child of a broke count to a wealthy prince that had the ears of European royals. Of course, with that we quickly paper over the exploitation that actually landed Maurice the bulk of his financial resources. But in the 17th century, as much as in the 21st, we seem to easily forgive the transgressions of blatant capitalism as long as we ourselves don't suffer the consequences.